Associate Dean and Director of University Libraries, and on behalf of Dean of Libraries Patty Orr, I just want to welcome you to the Armstrong Browning Library. Our Director of the ABL, Rita Pattison, is not here to welcome you either because she's on her way to London to lay the wreath on Browning's grave in Westminster. So she's got a great excuse. Patty's on her way to Galveston, not as good, but still a good excuse. But welcome, we're glad you're here.
Great, thank you so much. And now I'm going to ask Ken Starr, our president, if he would come up and give you a greeting as well.
Well, may I do it from right here?
Right here.
Yeah, in the law, we follow precedent. You know, I love having the students here. Do you all know you have finals day after tomorrow? We're going to have a moment of prayer. We're going to have fervent prayer, but thank you. We want to thank our students for you. But above all, thanks to our very special guests. We are to be cheerful givers. That's the admonition. And giving, we know from the Apostle Paul, is actually a gift. The ability to give and the spirit of giving is a gift. Sometimes people don't think of it that way. No, you're taking something. But we like to say, no, we're finding opportunities for you to do that which you really feel called to do, that you have a passion for, that God has placed something on your heart to do something. So the connection of faith and generosity is just so, it's like love and marriage and a horse and carriage. They just go together so very neatly, theologically, but also just, frankly, you can talk to someone who doesn't look at the world theologically, and he or she's going to really relate to that. And then when you bring out the great data that, by the way, the more you give and the more generous you are, the better you feel and the healthier you are. So, yeah, go ahead and go to the gym. That's good. Have your quiet time, study time, your be still time. You bet. But by the way, if you give, guess what's going to happen? You're going to be better for it, and the world's going to be a better place by virtue of that. So building that sense of that we were here to give to others, that I come not to be served but to serve, that I have a towel where the feet to be washed. So thank you for being here. I just want to say that for those who aren't part of the Baylor family, welcome. You've just been adopted. It only takes one time on campus and you become a child of Baylor with its proud history, its rich traditions. One of the richest parts of the tradition is that in 1845 and 1846, at the founding of Baylor University, a certain gentleman by the name of Sam Houston decided, I'm going to move to Independence, the little village in Washington County, named, of course, after the general, in Washington County. Why? So his two daughters could be educated at Baylor University. So we honor our ancestors, the generations who went before us, and I, as an adopted child of Baylor, perhaps appreciate the lineage and the heritage and the genealogy even more enthusiastically than those who are sixth generation Baylor families. Not that they don't appreciate it, they do, they treasure it, but I treasure it all the more. So thank you, Byron, for organizing this very important intellectual gathering, but an intellectual gathering with a very deep and rich theological content. So we give you thanks for doing this. Would you join me in saying thank you to Byron Johnson?
Thanks, Ken. Appreciate you stopping by.
Jay? Was that introduce Jay? Was that what I was supposed to do?
Thanks, Ken. Actually, I will introduce Jay. Jay Hein, as most of you know, has been working with us at the Institute for several years now. But Jay and I have been friends for many years, and we had some interesting conversations as he was leaving Washington and leaving the White House about what kind of plots we might hatch together here at Baylor. And so that's what we've been doing, dreaming up plots and then seeing if God will bless them, and he has been. So Jay, with all of his giftedness, one of his great skills is just being in front of people and talking. And so I've asked Jay to kind of MC our gathering today. So would you please join me in welcoming my dear friend, Jay Hein.
Thank you very much, Byron. It's a terrific honor to be a fellow at the Institute for Studies of Religion at Baylor University and to be part of the family that Judge Starr just so eloquently described and Byron has so dynamically conceived on his team. And today's conversation is of a piece, I think, with Baylor University. Pro Ecclesia, pro Texana, to glorify God in the rigor of scientific inquiry, to bless the world that He's created, so to move ideas into action, to make scholarship purposeful. That's why we're here, to talk about a case study, to talk about a scientific method that Dr. Amy Sherman, who you'll hear from later, deployed on our next speaker, because we identified an innovative practice by a Christian businessman who took very seriously the biblical admonition to give. He understood the truth that Judge Starr talked about, that there's blessing in that because the scriptures are clear. But he's a business guy, and he understands that performance matters and measurement matters, if indeed you want to be impactful and you want to make a difference. So we're here to talk about generosity, Christian philanthropy, not just in the supply side, not just in imparting that which we have to others. That's part of the process, but true investment into organizations who serve the least, the last, and the lost, and lead toward nothing short of community transformation if we get it right. These are the ideas of Dale Stockcamp, who is our keynote speaker this afternoon. Dale Stockcamp was a management consultant in the 1980s with what company that became known as Accenture, Anderson Consulting before. And in 1990, founded his own company, Stockcamp Associates. Hung a shingle, hired his wife, I think she was the first associate, and not too many years ago, sold the company for more than a couple $100 million. So they were successful. And indeed, the financial reward is a proxy for the kind of success that they achieved. But the deeper understanding of the success that they achieved, which is manifest in his philanthropy and the work that you'll hear about in the Mission Increase Foundation, is that he understood that his marketplace mattered first for ministry. So when he created jobs and he improved America's healthcare system by strengthening hospitals, he understood that he was doing the Lord's will. And he was glorifying God and extending his kingdom. But he also learned a lot in that marketplace position about strategy and effectiveness that he was able to then deploy into his missional activity in the nonprofit sector in a foundation. So I'm not going to tell a story for him. He is going to share that with us now. I wanted to underscore the vocational stewardship that Dale Stockcamp takes seriously, because in the program in Faith and Generosity at Baylor University, that's what we're trying to understand more. What is the faith factor in giving? What is giving really? It's part of our finances, but it's more so our lives. And how do we respond to the unique call that God has placed in our lives in whatever vocational track that we're in to be faithful? Dale Stockcamp has a lot to teach us, I think, and so I am honored to welcome him to the podium. Please join me in welcoming Dale Stockcamp.
Thank you for those kind words, Jay, and thank you for the opportunity to be here at Baylor today. In many ways, it's a bit of a homecoming, or it feels like a homecoming in a couple of ways. One, the healthcare company that I did operate, one of the best clients, our favorite clients that we ever had, was Baylor University, led up by a couple of great executives, Joel Allison and Lydia Jumanville, and they were just wonderful to work with. The other reason it's a bit of a homecoming is it's where our father, I've got my older brother Carl with me today, and our father took his first call. He was a pastor, Lutheran pastor, and took his first call to a little town called Otto, Texas, which we drove through today. Not a lot not there in Otto, Texas, but we were able to see that. We were able to see the hospital where Carl was born, and I'm sure glad that hospitals have changed their ways now. That was in Marlin. And the work that my firm does, or did in healthcare, was it helped hospitals improve their revenue cycle, or collection of receivables and payment. And when I heard that Carl was paid for with 2 chickens and a pig, I'm glad we didn't have to go through that. Can you imagine the government running that kind of a system in the future? So But it is good to be here today. It's good to talk about faith and how it relates to generosity. It's good to be tackling this issue because it's a sad fact, and study after study shows this over years, over decades, that when you look at what even committed Christians give, those people that attend church 2 times or more a month, they give on average about 2%, maybe a little over 2% of their income. 35%, and I'm kind of quoting from an article a couple of years ago in Christianity Today called Scrooge Lives. But in that same study that it talks about, 35% of Christians give nothing. And it talked about also the capacity there being about $85 billion. If you could just get Christians who are capable of tithing, giving 10%, plus the people who are already doing more of that, $85 billion of resources that could be freed up. But that's not happening, and so it's good to have discussions like we're going to have today. And I look forward to sharing the work that Mission Increase is doing and how we're helping ministries equip and serve their partners, their donors, and minister and disciple them to increase Christian giving over time. Give you a little bit of background on me. As I explained, my dad was a Lutheran pastor, and just growing up, had the blessing of being in a house where we were taught from early on the importance, the responsibility, and the joy that comes with giving. And it was just ingrained in you that that first job you took, mowing lawns, which in those days was about $1.50 or $2 to mow a lawn, you would tithe with that or give more to that. That was just a responsibility that you had. And I was very blessed that the Lord led me to a wonderful wife, Gail, who we've been married 31 years now. We have 3 children. She grew up in a similar home where she was taught the joy and the value and responsibility of giving as well. So we have commonality in thinking in that. I can't imagine a situation where you have a life partner where you're not common in thinking with regard to giving and generosity, and reacting would be very difficult in that environment. Went to school, and I always say this sheepishly when I'm at a prestigious place like Baylor, but I graduated from Portland State University in business in 1981, went to work for Accenture, was there about 10 years, and then started my own consulting company, which, for lack of creativity, Gail was the first associate, so it was Stockcamp and Associates, even though she could only see herself and our golden retriever as the people that were involved with the company at that point in time. But started Stockcamp and Associates, and the focus of Stockcamp and Associates was we helped hospitals, major academic medical systems, totally re-engineer and restructure their revenue cycle. That is, all of the aspects a hospital does to be paid for the services that they've rendered. If you've ever interacted with your insurance company, managed care, helped a loved one with Medicare, you know what a mess that process is. We would come in and we would spend a year with a hospital literally turning every job upside down, changing the way hundreds, if not thousands, of people would go about working together, restructuring workflows, redesigning interfaces, implementing extensive technology to simplify the processes and streamline activities through the process. And God blessed us with strong performance. We were able to add typically $50 to $100 million of benefits to the organizations that we worked with. And some of the larger organizations like the University of Pennsylvania, Cornell and Columbia, Northwestern, Stanford, they would literally get $200, $300 million or more of benefits. And so God really blessed the company with growth. Over the time frame that I had the company, we grew to about a 400-person company doing about $100 million of revenue a year. And then in God's perfect timing, myself and the other 15 owners decided to sell. It was perfect timing with regard to funding the Mission Increase Foundation, but it was also perfect timing because we sold in July of 2008, and that would not have happened literally 5 or 6 weeks later, so his timing was perfect in that regard. But all throughout having this healthcare company, I just viewed that as a funding mechanism for the more important work that needed to be done, and that was what kind of impact could we have with our giving, and what kind of kingdom impact could we have in terms of helping others. God had blessed the company mightily, and we are big believers in to whom much is given, much is expected. And that's what we wanted to do, to give back. And in trying to follow that life direction in terms much is given, much is expected, we felt we needed to be good stewards with the resources that God provided. And I think being a good steward means you need to take on the attitude of the parable of the talents, particularly if you've been blessed with the kinds of resources where you can really impact ministries and make a difference in a ministry in terms of its growth. You've got to think that your job is not done just by giving that money directly to that charitable organization and hoping it does good or hoping it goes to its intended purpose. You've got to always be thinking about, how can I multiply it? How can I have the maximum impact? I want to be that servant who the Lord comes back and says, I gave you 1 talent, I multiplied it into 10 talents. And that's what we were always focused on. Even from the first ministries, even before we founded Mission Increase, the work we did with a wonderful friend of ours, Luis Palau, and his organization, he can tell you that we were very involved and active with how we used and what we funded and how we leveraged our contributions. He likes to always call me Mr. Leverage and any presentation or anything that he does. But he'll also say that the discipline that was put in place in terms of managing and the strategies and approaches helped them quadruple their income over the years in that time frame. The other thing that's important, if you're going to be a good steward in your giving and you're going to make the most impact with what God's provided you in terms of your treasure, you've got to also be very disciplined about researching and how and which organizations to invest in and to support. Because there's some organizations that are worthy and there's others that are not. And maybe you've even got a worthy organization, but maybe that activity or that cause or what they're asking you to fund isn't the best way that you can gain the maximum leverage from your gift in that organization. So we spend a lot of time doing that. And the final guideline that my wife and I have when we look at, and Mission Increase operates in this way too, that we look at in our giving, and it's important, is the idea of urgency. John 4:35 and John 9:4 are very, very close to our hearts. In one, Jesus is saying to the disciples, don't say 4 months until the harvest. Look, the fields are ripe for the harvest now. In the other, it says, night is coming when we'll no longer be able to work. We don't know how long the Lord is going to allow us to be on this earth to help others, to serve others, either individually or collectively before Jesus returns. We don't know how long that's going to be, but we have to operate every day with incredible urgency and a passion, because people are sick, people are hurting, people are dying, and worse yet, they're dying spiritually lost and not having salvation as a result of not hearing the salvation message. So every day, in terms of how you use your resources and what you do, it's not only important to multiply them, but it's important to operate with great urgency and immediacy in your action. Mission Increase started in 1999, so it was about 9 years into Stockcamp and Associates that we started Mission Increase, and it really started by Gail and I getting together with a great friend of ours, Ron Post. Ron had founded and developed a wonderful disaster relief organization, an international relief organization that helped countless people around the world and is now called Medical Teams International. And he grew it to about what's now about a $200 million a year organization. In fact, our executive director, Dave Farquhar, and Dan Davis, our CFO, are here today, and they helped grow that organization to be the success that it was today. We got together with Ron because Ron had a calling in his life to say, how can I take what I've learned over the years of growing this organization and help other ministries? We wanted to be good stewards with our resources. We wanted to multiply and leverage our giving even further. So we got together and we talked about it and looked at how we could impact ministries. What we observed was there was a wonderful group of so many people who had a wonderful heart and a passion to help others. That might be in the form of inner city work with drug addicts, with the homeless, with at-risk youth. It might be causes like abused women, human trafficking, disaster relief. So many people that had a wonderful heart and a calling and passion to help others. The trouble was that often they struggled and they lived a constant hand-to-mouth existence, and their ministry was really struggling. Because what often happened was that what did not accompany this gift and this passion was at the same time they did not necessarily have the time, the interest, or necessarily the skill set to run that not-for-profit as a business. How do you effectively develop strategy for growth? How do you bring your board along and have good governance? And how do you get the board into and being very supportive and a part of the vision? And if you ask any not-for-profit leader where they feel they struggle the most, where they feel ill-equipped, where they feel that they really just, part of the job they dread doing the most, it was the fundraising and development side of things. So we decided we're going to help these ministries, and we're going to do it in a different way from what often foundations do. We were not just going to give a man a fish, or in other words, we weren't just going to give them a grant. Instead, we were going to focus on teaching a man how to fish. Teach them the skills of strategy development, of governance, of operating effectively and efficiently, and especially teach them fundraising concepts. Because we wanted to not have a dependency pattern and a one-time gift that's a consumable. We wanted to fund an organization that could sustain improvement for the long term. So we started Mission Increase. It was focused on teaching training model. And one of the first things we wanted to do is we wanted to ground everything in biblical scripture and principles. One of the sad parts about fundraising, especially in some of the Christian organizations, is secular thinking has crept into that. What would be called transactional or maybe subtractional thinking, where somehow if you give me $1,000 to my ministry, you're out something. You're out some resources. You're not having that available for you to use. It's not hard to see why, if someone has that way of thinking, which society has led people to believe, that they would sheepishly go about approaching donors, about approaching partners, about approaching people asking for funds, that they wouldn't enjoy doing that. Because what they didn't understand or remember was that we all know that the most blessed person in any giving transaction is the donor, because they're using their resources as God intended them to. They're fulfilling God's plan for them. They're storing up treasures in heaven. So while it sounds like a simple concept, so much of the work that we do in Mission Increase is we, through our 17-part training curriculum, through our extensive hands-on consulting, one-on-one coaching, we transform the mind of that ministry leader to have them understand that what they're doing is they're really serving their partners, their donors, they're discipling them. They care for their heart and they care for their spiritual walk. They're not treating them as an ATM or a money machine to fund their ministry, but they're getting them involved. When you can change that way of thinking in the mindset of the ministry leader, you just unleash incredible passion and confidence in what they're going to do. And when you can change their thinking to one of a scarcity mentality, that is that God only has a limited number of resources, and if he chooses not to fund your ministry, that won't happen. We know that that's not true. God wouldn't birth their ministry unless he wanted to provide the funding for that ministry as well. So we spend a lot of time in our model teaching ministry leaders that mindset. We offer our training for free. We believe that those ministry leaders are taking a great risk. They're certainly risking their financial livelihoods often by doing what they're doing, and sometimes they're risking their life in terms of the work and the location in the world where they're doing it. So we want to be the encouragement by providing those resources for free. We heavily enable the work that we do with technology. We believe it's a tremendous enabler to be more disciplined and streamlined and efficient with the process. So we have a lot of technology that we apply, and we have a very highly disciplined screening structure that we do as well. There's 72 criteria that we look at and analyze and quantify when we work with an organization in terms of those worthy of supporting. God's hand has been on Mission Increase, and if you fast forward to the current time, we're now have a staff of about 20 people. We're working directly with about 1,300 ministries, and we're working and doing training and granting in Seattle, in Portland, in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Phoenix, Denver. We added Raleigh, North Carolina at the beginning of this year. At the beginning of next year, we're adding Kansas City, and there's several other cities that are going to be adding a Mission Increase, God willing, in the near future. There's been a great return in terms of the investment because, again, we measure everything. Because if you don't measure it, you can't say I'm being a great steward and multiplying the outcomes. So we know that just from our direct grants, we've given about 484 grants, I guess is the exact number, for about $21 million, and that's multiplied 5 times over to have an impact of about $104 million. That's great, but that's not the number I get most excited about. The number I get most excited about is because of that combined training and granting model, it produces sustainable improvement for ministries in their income over the long term. And that's what is really the power of combining the training and granting. So for example, in 2009, we don't have 2010 statistics yet, but in 2009, on an operating budget of $3.6 million, the ministries collectively, the 1,000+ ministries we're working with, increased their income by over $73 million in 2009. Too early to know 2010, but the numbers are trending well. And we would expect 80, 90 million, maybe even more in terms of that being the annual impact on giving for 2010, because what we're seeing is that 3/4 of the ministries that we're talking to are seeing their income grow in 2009 and 10, and that's certainly not the trend that's out there in the not-for-profit community now. We know that the combination of training and granting is very important to the ministries as well, because most of the times when a ministry first comes to a foundation, whatever they say or not, they're looking for a grant. Whether they say they just want training or coaching, they're really hoping to get a grant. But now, and this will come out in the comments, I think, that in the study that was done, 59% of the ministries that both received training and a grant with Mission Increase actually said the training was more important than the funds and the grant. So we know that that's sinking in and making an impact. Our goal, God willing, for Mission Increase, from a kingdom perspective, our goal is that we have got an army of not-for-profit ministries out there, resources that are available to leverage and utilize to reach that many more people. Our goal is to reach the sick, to reach the poor, to help them, to tend to their physical needs and their hurts, and in doing so, being in such a position, who better is in a position than to share the salvation message with someone that you've helped tend to a physical need and a hurt. Our goal is to leverage and utilize the ministries that are out there to reach that many more people for Christ. Our goal is to be the infrastructure, the backbone, provide the technology, provide the training content, the curriculum, the methodology to support Mission Increase offices and locations in all cities of the country. Each office can support, using our materials and technology, 100 to 200 different ministries. We want to give all that away for free. What we're looking to do is to find the resources and find the people that would participate in helping to have a giving and training officer and funds available for granting in those different offices. When we met with Bob Buford, who's a big supporter of what we're doing because he's always into 100x impact, he was excited that there was someone who would get excitement out of just investing in overhead, as he called it. But that's what we want to do. We want to be the back office operation. We hope to have an impact. It's a little nick in terms of the overall level, but the impact we hope to have is we want to increase giving by Christians by $500 million, at least on an annual basis, at least on an interim basis. And we can do that if we have an active Mission Increase operation going in about 15 to 20 different cities. Now, that's just a number, and that's just a financial measure of what we hope to be able to do in terms of the economics. What does that $500 million really mean? What that means is instead of now that we've added Raleigh and Kansas City, instead of helping maybe 1,500 to 2,000 ministries a year, now we would see if we can have that kind of an impact, we could be helping 10,000 plus ministries a year. Even more importantly, those 10,000 ministries are going to be working with better discipling, better developing, better partnering with their partners and their donors, and literally create the opportunity for hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of additional partners and donors to participate with their ministry and to maybe for the first time in their lives experience the joy that comes from giving and helping the hurting and the lost, and to be storing their treasures in heaven. While they're experiencing that joy, these resources will be able to allow the ministries. Right now, our ministries are working with 16 million people. We've helped many of those double in size. If we can take this and scale it to a much larger basis, literally tens of millions of people will be able to be helped in terms of their physical needs and have the salvation message saved. We see this as a big opportunity to be able to expand the kingdom and save people, not only physically, but also spiritually as well. We're excited to see communities being transformed. I wish I could take you to Portland, Oregon and see what it's like to have 200 ministries work together with great synergy who before didn't even know each other or were in competition with each other. That's happening in Phoenix as well, and Raleigh and other cities as well. And then for the people that do get involved with bringing mission increase to their city, we provide them with a tremendous opportunity to be a good steward, to come back and say, look, I had one talent, $1 that I gave, and I had a $10 to $15 impact. Because there is a cost to bringing mission increase to another city. We don't have money coming our way. It's not about more income coming to us. There's a cost having local training and giving officer and granting. But to those people who participate in that way, it's a tremendous example to be able to multiply their talents as it commands in the parable of the talents. So as you think of us, just please say a prayer for mission increase, and say a prayer that God would provide as we go from city to city sharing the story, that God would raise up a champion in each of those cities, consistent maybe with Esther 4:14, where Esther was raised for a time like this, as Mordecai challenged her. And pray that God would raise someone up in each of those cities that say, I want to have a dramatic impact on my city. I want to transform and support 200 plus ministries in my city. I want tens of thousands of additional people, Christians, to be giving greater portions of their income, and I want to help that many more people. We just pray that those resources and that champion would arise in each of the cities so that we can continue to expand the reach and the breadth and the depth of what we can do, and hopefully someday, God willing, be looking at a number that's higher than that chronic 2% number that it's typically we seem to be stuck at in terms of the Christian giving level. Thank you.
Thank you, Dale. As I look at the impressive Baylor Honor School students who've joined us today, think about a verse that I've often heard Dale share in his testimony. Ephesians 2:10, for we are God's handiwork, created by Christ Jesus to do good works, as God planned before time. His life had a purpose. I love that scripture because it's such a high holiness view of God. But the verse also requires faithfulness and response. It requires us to discern what that purpose is and to faithfully pursue it. Among the ways I could say thank you to Dale, I can't think of a better way than to say thank you for your faithfulness. It's evident in your testimony that you listened hard and you leveraged, to use your term, that which you were given intellectually to make a difference in the marketplace and in the world around you. So thank you. And while we thought that was a really good story, we thought we should check it out. So Dr. Amy Sherman, who is a fellow of the Institute for Studies of Religion at Baylor, conducted a case study, and we wanted to dig into the story in a more thorough and rigorous way to investigate the methodologies. Because if there's going to be transference, if we're going to take the inspiration and turn it to replication and leverage an individual best practice into societal change, we're going to need to know the working parts a little bit more clearly. And so it follows the methodology of the ISR. We have a case study series. It's scientific and it's rigorous, but it's not abstract. It's applied. It's pro texana. It's about seeing these ideas at work and investigating its relative impact. Because anyone involved in consequential change understands that some ideas work and some ideas don't. It's not one idea good or bad. And we wanted to dig inside the model. And you heard Dale speak to, that's not me. You heard Dale speak to the why and the what of his model. What you'll hear from Dr. Amy Sherman is the how to a degree, but also the how's it doing. Amy Sherman is perfect for this work. That's hers. So that was my cue, I think, actually, that I'm done. So quick word about Dr. Sherman. She is a rigorous scholar, the PhD. I think this sort of typifies the Amy Sherman that I admire. Her PhD, which was earned at the University of Virginia, her dissertation was published by Oxford University Press, so very prestigious. What was the work that she did, the field research? Well, she's on the top of a mountain that she had to sort of pass guerrilla warriors on the way in Central America to get to, which I believe she didn't tell her mom until after, so that she could study the farming practices of the faithful, the Christians, in one part of the mountains region against the animists, who had a different view of creation and the other. That began a long journey for her as a scholar practitioner, seeking to understand the faith factor, how faith motivates others to be the faithful, to be engaged in societal change, and then using her research skills to find out what works, what doesn't, and why. And her latest project was a case study on the Mission Increase Foundation. Without further ado, Dr. Amy Sherman.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you all for coming out. I was the one that had the really quite a privilege to get to spend several months, mostly in 2009, hanging out with the Mission Increase folks. And as Jay said, we went there to kick the tires. And that involved, in terms of our methodology, a couple of site visits, a lot of interviewing of staff and constituents of the organization, and then also the composition and execution of a fairly in-depth study of the constituents that Mission Increase Foundation works with. We were able to generate responses from about 450 of Mission Increase's constituents to try to really determine what value MIF had brought to them and their organizations. So the bottom line, I think, that we concluded was that this was, in fact, a unique approach and an effective approach. So I like to think of Mission Increase Foundation a little bit as a hidden gem in the philanthropic sector. As many of you know, that sector is very, very large. In fact, there's over 75,000 charitable foundations in the United States. And I'm a bottom line kind of girl, so if I was sitting in the audience, I might think, okay, 75,000 foundations out there, so why'd you guys go look at this little thing out in Portland, Oregon? What are they all about? So I'd like to try to put their work in a larger context before going into a great deal of detail about who they are and what they do. But as you heard from Dale, Mission Increase Foundation isn't just about writing grants, writing checks to organizations, but it's really about the work of transforming how nonprofit leaders think about fund development and strengthening the organizational capacities of these nonprofit organizations so that they can better implement their mission. And as he mentioned, there's a unique mix that MIF brings to the table, because they don't only provide training or only provide grant making or only do consulting, but they actually pull those three things together. And that was something that was really, we discovered was quite unique among charitable foundations. Well, as I mentioned, I'll say a little bit more in a few moments about what they do and who they've served. But I have a couple of slides that just try to take this little group out in Portland, Oregon, and put them into the larger context of that big philanthropic world out there. One thing I think that's very important to say about Mission Increase Foundation is that its focus, which is on capacity building, it's on making the organization itself stronger, that is quite unique. Unfortunately, the 2000 report here from the 2000 numbers are the most recent I was able to get. But if you take all those 75,000 foundations and you look at all the money that goes from the charitable giving sector into the nonprofit sector, only 4% or so of those grant-making dollars go towards this really vital task of helping the organization to do what it does better. the vast majority of grants go towards direct services. Very few people are really involved in trying to raise and equip the organization as a whole. Now, one thing this slide shows is that I think there's a wonderful trend happening where this kind of giving towards capacity building is increasing. And I think that's a very positive trend, because if we really want to see Christian and other nonprofit organizations serve more people, hang in there longer, have good sustainability, we really do have to improve them in terms of their capacity. And yet, out of this huge amount of money that goes to the nonprofits, only a very, very small slice is focused on capacity building. And that's the slice that Mission Increase is involved in. Now, Dale gave you a number of numbers, and his are actually more up to date than mine are. Mine were still drawing back from earlier in 2009. But what I wanted to do just with this slide was give you a quick snapshot. Mission Increase has been around about 10 years. As Dale mentioned, actually now they're giving us more, about like 21 million in total. But here they are, this little foundation. Not very many people have heard of them. And you start stacking them up against some better known foundations with a very large number of total assets. And just look there at the amazing impact that this little organization out in Oregon has had compared to these really big players. Now, unfortunately, the other foundations hadn't had any one particular 10-year initiative in capacity building, so I wasn't able to do quite an apples to apples comparison. But if we were to simply take the numbers and multiply them by 2, you would see still that this small foundation is having a much, much larger impact than even these organizations that have this huge amount of money and resources that they could pour into capacity building. So that's sort of MIF's approach in an overall context. I also wanted to sort of get a sense of, okay, well, let's take a one-year snapshot. So I tried to find a number of foundations that are part of that 4% of that little slice of giving that goes towards capacity building. And here it may look like, well, gee, Mission Increase doesn't stack up very well. They're way down at the bottom of the list of the ranking. But what I want to point out to you is the massive difference in this column. Here we have a very small organization reaching over 1,000 organizations now, and someone as big as the Packard Foundation at over $6 billion, actually only doing about twice as much granting as what Mission Increase has been able to do. I'm really quite struck by this. The bottom line point here, I think, is to basically say this small organization has a pretty large footprint, even compared to some of the big boys, so to speak. Well, as I mentioned, what Mission Increase does involves a mix of grant making, training, and consulting. And as Dale hinted at, not only is that mixture itself rather unique, since many foundations only do grant making or only provide training, and here's an organization that brings those things together. Another part of the uniqueness of their approach is that the content of what they're actually doing in their training is significantly different than traditional models of fundraising. The paradigm that Mission Increase follows is called transformational giving, and it would take me about 2 hours to really clearly articulate what transformational giving is all about. But this slide here highlights kind of 3 signature characteristics of this paradigm. One is that in this understanding of transformational giving, you don't just measure the success of your fundraising efforts on the sole factor of, well, how many more dollars actually got brought in. That's obviously a very legitimate and important criteria of success for an organization that's teaching people how to fundraise. But in the transformational giving paradigm, success is really more about increasing the commitment of that donor base to champion the cause of the organization, so that those individual donors become more personally engaged. They begin bringing more of their own resources to the table. But then they actually become advocates and champions of the cause that the organization is forwarding. And then they actually begin doing a lot of the work of doing the fundraising. that the staff really isn't the one primarily tasked with raising the money. The task of the staff is to disciple its donors so that the donors become advocates and champions of the organization, speaking the message of that organization to their sphere of influence so that they can bring all of their folks along, and you see this real multiplication effect. Now, Mission Increase has selected a particular slice of the nonprofit world for its focus. As Dale mentioned, they are focused particularly on Christian nonprofit organizations that are involved in providing direct social services, such as helping the homeless or being involved with youth. And moreover, within that collection of Christian nonprofits, they're particularly focused on smaller, more grassroots organizations, those that have annual budgets of only between $200,000 and $2 million a year. One of the interesting things we learned through our survey research with regard to the characteristics of Mission Increase's constituents is that 2/3 of them came to Mission Increase with very, very little prior background or knowledge about fundraising or donor development. And so obviously this is a particular arena of training that many, many Christian nonprofit organizations need a lot of help in. Well, Dale is Mr. Leverage, and one of the things that's been very impressive about Mission Increase has to do with the way that the dollars invested through the foundation have achieved leverage. Now, part of that leverage is achieved by the fact that virtually all of the grants made by Mission Increase are in fact matching grants. So built right into the structure of the philanthropic model is the desire to multiply the resources. But what's impressive about this particular statistic is that 5 out of the 6 branches of Mission Increase have not only been able to double the impact, which is what you would expect in a matching grant program, but in some cases, if you look at Portland, there's been over a 6-fold increase, or in Phoenix, over a 3-fold increase, or in Seattle, in San Francisco, 3-fold increase. Now that, I think, this slide is sort of my slide for donors, potential donors. The idea here is, my goodness, why wouldn't I want to invest my money in an organization? If I'm looking for a good return on investment, why wouldn't I want to invest my charitable dollars in a group like Mission Increase Foundation? Look at how much further they are going to go. Well, Mission Increase is, at the end of the day, involved in helping people to raise more resources. So it was very important as we kicked the tires to simply ask the question, well, all these groups come for training, and do they actually raise more money? And as Dale mentioned, you heard some of those numbers. And the basic answer to the question was yes. The performance of these organizations did improve as a result of their involvement with Mission Increase. It did matter, though, how much they were involved with the foundation. What we did with the 450 survey responses was assign involvement scores to each one of them, and we calculated involvement scores based on the number of trainings that the organization had attended, the number of people from the ministry that had come to the trainings, the number of hours that they had received coaching or consulting from Mission Increase, whether or not they had received a grant. And then we took those scores and divided the pool of its constituents into these 4 particular clusters. And as you can see, there's a very straightforward relationship between the degree of involvement, basically how much of the Mission Increase banquet did the nonprofit leader digest, and the more they ate at the banquet, the better they did in terms of their revenue generation. The findings were the same with regard to revenue diversification. And this, of course, is another really important symbol of healthiness in nonprofit organizations. Not just that you're increasing the overall amount of your revenue, but that your revenue is actually coming from a variety of income streams so that you're not overly reliant on any one particular stream, because that would affect your sustainability over time. And here again, we see that the more intensively organizations were involved with Mission Increase, the greater likelihood they had to have increased their diversification of revenue. Now, this is an area, I think, where Mission Increase can still have some room for improvement. As you can see, a significant number of constituents that receive training and coaching from Mission Increase do, in fact, diversify their revenue streams, but we'd like to see that, I think, become even stronger. And then finally, as I mentioned, Mission Increase is pursuing this strategy of transformational giving, which is different from the transactional or traditional or subtractional model of fundraising that Dale had mentioned. And so it was important for us not only to evaluate the organization based on traditional measures like, well, they're a fundraising group, let's see how much more revenue these organizations are raising. Well, they're a fundraising group, let's see how much better are they doing in terms of diversifying their income. Because Mission Increase's whole effort is to try to increase the commitment of its donor base so that those people become ever more passionate about the cause of the organization and really become champions, it was important to ask additional questions like, well, are the organizations and ministries that receive training and help from Mission Increase, are they successful in casting that vision and acquiring new donors? Are they successful in taking donors that have kind of fizzled out over time and reinvigorating their involvement? And are they successful in moving donors from what Mission Increase calls P to O, from people who are simply participants, they just write a check to support the organization, to becoming owners, those champions who will really take responsibility and ownership to say, as a member of this nonprofit, as a champion of it, I want to use my involvement, I want to spread this cause to my sphere of influence and bring more resources to the table. And again, once you see, as you see here, there's a very clear and straightforward pattern that the degree of involvement has a high correlation to the success that the organizations have on those particular outcomes. So that's just a few highlights of what we found when we went and kicked the tires. I think the bottom line was that our initial sense that something special was going on out in Portland, Oregon, were true, and it was really a delight to be able to look a little bit more deeply at what they were about.
Thank you. So you've heard two stories. You've heard a philanthropist's story, a businessman's journey, and you've heard a model sort of unpacked. Now we'd like to bring you into the conversation to be able to ask questions in either direction. So begin thinking about what you'd like to ask. But to help us get going, I'd like to bring forward two of Baylor's finest. Two of your graduates are among the nation's elite in this space. They lead large Christian organizations that are dedicated to increasing God's generosity movement. David Wills, who received a bachelor's and a law degree here, and is president of the National Christian Foundation. When Amy Sherman was toiling on the top of a mountain in, was it Guatemala, David Wills was traipsing around Washington, D.C. with Ronald Reagan's tax code under his arm because his calling was seen through those pages, because he understood that tax implications have a big impact, or could, on our giving. And so he commenced in a career of planned giving and using his profession, the law, to literally transform the practice of giving, and particularly among Christians. And so, David, if you could join me up front, and Todd Harper, who followed his student days at Baylor here on the mission field and through Campus Crusade for Christ and Russia and Yugoslavia, and came back to the wealth business, was partner in an investment firm, which was his segue then to the generosity movement. He is now president of Generous Giving, which is the foremost instrument in America that teaches the principles of God's heart for our sharing of wealth and resources. Do a terrific job championing and teaching. Dale has been a speaker at those conferences. So gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind beginning this conversation by just offering some reflections, either on Dale's journey or on the model, kind of what you heard. It doesn't have to all be positive. If you want to poke some holes, that's welcome as well. So, but thank you. David, you want to lead off?
Sure.
It's a privilege to be here. I work for one of those foundations that doesn't do much giving to capacity building, so I felt a little small about that. But it does the work that we do does afford me an opportunity to interact with lots of givers. We serve probably about 6,000 to 7,000 Christian givers across America, and probably grant to 15 to 20,000 different organizations each year. And so we're getting it from both sides, and so we spend time in that world. And I don't really have anything to poke at, because we are, in my world, desperately hopeful that more Dale Stockcamps will come on the scene. We desperately need folks that are, and he actually is an example of what he's trying to create if you kind of follow that pattern and listen to him, because the key to all of the numbers that you showed really is a matter of the heart change of a giver. Ultimately, that's what makes those numbers look the way they look. And so you got to, today you got to meet and hear from one of those people. And sadly, there aren't as many as we wish there were. And so we are very thankful for your example and your testimony. In fact, it's actually kind of a new thing that people like Dale are even willing to stand up and give their testimony. You very rarely ever hear that. But hopefully that's changing, and Todd may address that earlier, because that's a key part of what generous giving is about. But there are 3 key questions that every giver asks on their journey. They ask, why should I be generous? How do I do it? And then where do I give? And it's that first question, and I'll let Todd more elaborate on that, that is what's changing with regards to the transformational transformational giving model that Mission Increase is teaching. Because information alone will only just incrementally or maybe arithmetically alter someone's giving. So if I give you better information, you might give a little bit more. But if I can get your heart, it will change everything. Okay? And we know that engagement is what changes our heart, and a heart change is what alters our behavior. And so if we want to take that 2 or 2.6 or whatever percentage of giving of income that happens, and we want to see that move, engagement is going to be the key. This, of course, goes to the very heart of spiritual formation in all of its facets. And so if we can get just personal here for just a second in an academic setting, follow Dale's example. Get engaged in what you're passionate about, and it will change you, and it will change the people around you. And that's kind of the big message for what I'm hearing. A couple of things, just an extra, a couple of other points. I don't know if there are any development officers in here, but it is a field that's going to change dramatically. And we've been sensing this for years, and the model is bearing this out. The future of people that raise money for nonprofits will not be raising money from donors. They will be shepherding givers that will be doing the fundraising in the future. And that's a big trend change. But what happens is you can't help it. If you stand Dale up and ask him to talk about something, you got 3 minutes before Mission Increase comes out of his mouth, max. And maybe 3 seconds, okay? It's just because he's wired, he's engaged in that, and therefore he shares it. It kind of makes you want to invest in Mission Increase, doesn't it? It's a pretty good deal, isn't it? Well, pick your organization, pick your passion, get engaged, and then you'll start to do the same thing, and the dominoes will start to fall. I will tell you that I can speak just slightly from a research standpoint, because I've met with the Mission Increase folks and looked into their model somewhat. And what happened in 2009 was really the kicker, in my opinion, for the validity of what Mission Increase is doing. We're in the business of getting contributions from lots and lots of people. We'll have about over $500 million of contributions this year will come in from probably about 4,000 or 5,000 of those givers. 2009 was a bad year for giving. It was a bad year for churches. It was a tough year for parachurch organizations. And the statistics of Mission Increase in 2009 are the inverse of what happened out there in the world of giving. And now you know the reason why, right? We all know the reason why. Because their model, their training, encourages engagement so that your heart is captured. And where your heart is, there your treasure will be. And then if I can get your heart and I can get your treasure, then I can get your voice. And you'll replicate, and around and around and around it goes. So, just a few comments.
Well, thanks, David. David mentioned 3 questions, why, how, and where. And generous giving exists to really answer that why question. Why should we give? And what are the biblical motivations for giving? And really what we do more than anything is we tell stories of generous people. And so Dale and his wife Gail attended one of our conferences, shared their story, and not went maybe a little bit more into the why they were generous in addition to how Mission Increase works. And for the past 10 years, I've had the opportunity to meet people like Dale and Gail who are just kind of living extraordinarily generous lives. And the thing that to me is so compelling is that I've never met any person who's living generously who is miserable. I mean, which is part of why I'm excited about this whole faith and generosity thing, and studying the effects of generosity and the impact of faith on generosity and the fruit of generosity in our own lives as well as those around us. I mean, it's just a win-win-win deal. And I think, hearing Dale talk about, you just sense his passion around what he's doing. Does anybody feel sorry for Dale?
He gave away all that.
I mean, he's giving all his money away. I just feel so bad for him. And it's so interesting. I meet people who are giving, radically generously, just in ways that most of us have never met or even heard. People giving away 90% of their income and choosing to live on a certain salary and giving everything else away, no matter how much it is. And it's a very compelling apologetic for the power of Jesus' words, which he said it's more blessed to give than to receive. I've yet to meet somebody who contradicts the truth of God's word. And it's really fun to get to be here with all of you. So thanks.
Very well done. Thank you both. I mean, what a compliment to Baylor University. You produced these two leaders. For us, Byron's team and the program of Faith and Generosity, we're seeking their counsel because we want to know which questions to ask when we look at, again, the side of our equation. What does faith mean in the why, and how does it motivate giving, but also how we can increase effectiveness so we can get the returns that Dale was talking about. But let's include you in the conversation. Does anyone have a question or a comment? If so, could you please maybe share your name, the part of Baylor that you're occupying, and I think it's an open floor. So if any of these four interested you, they're all fair game.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm Michael. I'm a sophomore here, Baylor University scholar studying classics, and my question is, when Mission Increase helps organizations to look for donors, who are the donors that they look for? Is it individuals, other organizations, or what do the donors usually look like?
Yeah, and this gets to the income stream that Amy was talking about too. It's really important for ministries to have a broad number of income streams. They should be raising money from individuals. They should be raising money from direct mail. They should be raising money from foundations, from grants and other foundations, and they should have like a major donor development program. Those are just some examples of different income streams. And the sad part about it is when we first start working with ministries for the first time and you ask them to break down their income streams, they look at you with some blank look because they don't know. Or, worse yet, they only have one income stream. And that's a recipe for an organization that's going to be out of business soon. How many organizations have there been where you've had maybe a ministry that was totally dependent on a major donor, the major donor changes or passes away and they're out of business, or maybe they relied on a grant from a foundation and that stopped and they're out of business. So in terms of your question, first of all, in terms of where we seek them and train and teach them to how to find their donors, First of all, we teach them you got to diversify your income streams. Then we help them in all of those different areas. Individual donors, will work with them and say, who's actively engaged in your ministry right now and supportive? And it better start with your board. Because if you've got a board that isn't living the life of participating in that ministry, supporting, helping advance it, and giving sacrificially to it, you don't have the right board composition. And then you work with them to help identify their network of influence and people that they know, to expand from there and equip them to tell that story as well. Then the other donors really depend on those other income streams, help pointing them to foundations. We take great pride in the fact that many of our ministries that we've helped teach to train grants go out to foundations and get their first grant request or a grant from those organizations.
Thank you. Yes.
I have a question. You used the term capacity builders, and then David followed up on that. I'm really not familiar with the term and what the definition is, or what you see as the definition of capacity builders.
Capacity building is basically strengthening the organization's effectiveness by looking at a variety of issues like their sustainability, whether they have a strategic plan, what are their governance structures, how strong is their board, are they ever even showing up to board meetings, as well as whether they have their IT capacity as part of it, their communication strategies, how skilled are they in doing donor development, all of those issues that have to do not so much with the actual feeding of the homeless, but the taking care of the organization so that it has sustainability and longevity and health and order in order to be able to keep doing that good work.
An easy example, simple example would be Mission Increase funding a development person at a small, so they're motivated to invest in that capacity building so that that organization can function better.
Which runs counter to the mainstream nonprofit story, because philanthropy, large and small individual donors, they want to go to the next new thing, or to the direct service is a very compelling story. And we hear conversation in the nonprofit sector space about how come we can't get that infrastructure to zero? We want it all going to the direct. There's a serious question posed, completely ignoring the conversation we're having today, that the health of the organization will extend the mission proportionately. Yes?
I just have a quick question. I'm Sam Pomeroy. I'm a junior here in the Honors College studying philosophy. And I was wondering, I guess let's take World Vision or something, for example. How do you guide them in a way that they can approach just the nasty reality of advertising in any way? I guess thinking about it, that would be just such a burden on the budget of an organization that doesn't have a lot of income. Paying for speakers, commercials, websites, all that. It seems like would be such a high cost, especially in this day and age. And I was curious if your model dives into that with them and talks about more effective ways of advertising.
Yeah. Well, first of all, with organizations like a World Vision, we do get some of them that do participate in our training, large organizations. We don't grant to those organizations and work with them on capacity building through grants, because our philosophy is that they've got enough resources to use. They've got a development department to be able to do that. And so typically, as Amy pointed out, the organizations we work with have annual incomes between $200,000 and $2 million. But yes, we do work with organizations on how do they get their message out. It might not be in the form of advertising, but we give extensive consulting and work with them in the area of things like their communications with their partners and their donors, like in the form of newsletters. We had one organization, I think, that sent out about 26 newsletters a year to organizations. What do you think is happening with those 26 letters? They're going straight in the garbage and being ignored. And we had to work with them and educate them to be more effective, to streamline that, and to complement and supplement it with other things. Because it's amazing how many organizations will do that. There's others that have spent incredible amounts of money either outsourcing or doing direct mailing that wasn't having a commensurate return. So we had to educate and teach organizations, use this money this way instead of this way, and you'll get a 4 times greater return.
Yes.
I'm Preston Yancey. I'm a junior in the Honors College studying theology and literature, and I sort of have a question, comment for all of you. I've been able to do a little bit of work on a small scale with some nonprofits, one of which works with men who are in prison and houses their families during that time for them. The other is with women who are taken off the street so that they can be brought back into a more stable environment. And largely what I've been able to do is help produce documentaries for them, little snippets that can be shown in churches and larger organizations for that.
great.
And I'm hearing you all talk a lot about how story is becoming the new key. And I wonder if maybe each of you in some way could maybe comment on where you see story going in the future. I was thinking very much about how 2009 was a very bad year for giving, especially with things like Lottie Moon and other type of mission works. We saw a lot of suffering there. So how do you envision story as a form of advertising that's not advertising, as becoming increasingly real for us in the future?
Yeah, well, I would say that story is incredibly transformative. That's how you get that heart. That's how you get that heart engagement. What really struck me about Mission Increase, though, is the way that they counsel nonprofits to tell their story. You can tell a story that's basically all about, we're organization X, and look at all the amazing things we do. We do this, and we do that, and we do this, and we do the other, and here's this great thing we do, and we do, and we do the, and you can send us a check, and you can, you can play a part in that. Here's the number to call to send us your Visa number. And so the story becomes all about, look what we're doing, and you get to sort of, support it a little bit. And what Mission Increase tells folks is, no, you don't want to tell the story about what you're doing and how they can sort of spectate and send you a check every now and then. You want to tell the story about how, here's the cause and here's how you can be, the way they put it is, you got to get them down from the gymnasium stands where they're spectating and actually get them down onto the floor in the game, so that they have that personal engagement, which then just really animates. So it's not just telling more stories. That's a really important thing, but also, well, what kind of stories are you going to tell, and what's the message you're going to give through that story?
And in addition, who is telling the story is a big thing that you heard. That's going to be a big change. So the medium of that conversation is going to happen around the dinner table with a family. It's going to happen at a party somewhere where people are just influencing each other in a personal way. It's going to happen over a business lunch, because that engagement trigger means that a new person's going to be telling the story, and it's going to be highly personal. It's not going to be canned at all. It's going to be about heart-on-heart sharing. It's going to be a big part of the future.
Part of what we've learned is the power of peer story, and I think that's, we host conferences, and we always have preachers, who speak, big names, people have heard of them, and they're great. They're professional speakers, basically. And they carry the message, but everybody remembers the story of Dale and Gail Stockcamp, or Stanley Tam, or Alan Barnhart. It's the person who, wow, he is a business person like me, or I relate to her, and it's a model of what my life could look like. Not that I have to do the exact same thing, but it expands people's perspectives of what could be, and that's, I think stories do that better than teaching.
I think we've kept you a couple minutes past advertised. I'm sure you'll agree with me that it was worth it. I'm so impressed with each of the speakers' presentation. It was edifying. So thank you all, and thank you for participating. We're adjourned.
Thank you.